yeah, I think that's it. So any questions, let me know at the end. See you, buddy. How do I begin with this? All right, so this took place in between October of 2001 and Christmas of 2002. All right, so it spans a 14-month period. And
Sorry.
sitting in a chair is hard work. It takes coordination and balance. So what the hell is that thing?
Pomegranate juice.
That's a terrible looking little bottle. Look at it. It's like
The bigger ones are uglier.
It's
That one's better.
wonderful. That's terrible. All right. So anyway, it takes place over a 14-month period, and it started off when I was doing my student teaching, and it ends during my first year teaching here. So that's the span that this covers. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. I don't know. But the other thing is it's all true. Okay, it all really happened. I'm not exaggerating anything. It happened. All right. So when I got hired to do my internship, it was a full year. And the idea is that you're done. At the end of the year, you've got 33 credits. You've basically got a master's degree. You've got your teaching certificate. It's like the last big wrap-up thing. And it was just a great way of getting everything out of the way in 1 year and also getting all the practical experience you need. So it was a good idea. And I told you at the beginning of the year, like, how that all went down with that crazy professor I had and not wanting to do what he did with his life. So I got accepted, and I started. And the only thing that was a little odd about the whole situation was, well, there were two things. The first is that everybody in the whole area there's just one high school, and it's huge. And it's actually two buildings. So there's a 9th and 10th grade building, and then you have to cross the street, and there's an 11th and 12th grade building. There's like 2,700 students. It's huge. So imagine 1,100 more than there are in here, and that's how many there are. So the whole area. So, you know, if you live in town, you're living among your students, which is normally fine. The other thing is that one of the prerequisites, one of the things you have to do to get into the program is you basically have to sign in writing a thing that stipulates that you're going to quit whatever job you have. So whatever you're used to doing to make money in your spare time, you have to give it up because they want you to devote all of your time to the internship. Okay? So I had been an assistant manager after working there since my freshman year in college at a movie and music store. And back then it was like the central hub in State College. Like that was the store everybody went to. So, you know, it was good. I got to spend time with people and I got to know everybody and it was nice because I like people and, you know, it's nice to just be in the middle of things. And it was also just a good way of, you know, making extra money. Like, you know, it gave me money to just go out and do things and pay off some debts and, you know, things like that. And so to give it up meant I'd have to give up the little apartment I had in downtown State College. And that meant that I was in the unenviable position of having to move back home with my parents. So I was 23 and having to move back literally into my parents' basement, which is what you never want to have to do. You know, like you had a little taste of freedom, of independence, and you have to move. So I did. And I decided, see, my dad and I get along great. My mom and I, we love each other dearly, but we're very similar. And after about 36 hours of being around each other, things start to go south. So we'll start irritating each other, and then, like, you know. So I always know when the time to go after a weekend visit is coming, you know, like I always kind of know. So I needed a buffer. So instead of going and, you know, spending most of the time in my bedroom, which was still just as I left it, I basically commandeered the basement. So I got a little refrigerator, I got my stereo, I got my TV, you know, I basically took over the couch, and I basically nested. So I had, like, you know, if there was like a nuclear war, I'd have enough supplies for like 6 weeks, like self-contained, because that way I could just go down there and be away from all the mess if things got stressful. And that was nice, like I needed that. So the year got started. The other thing, there was a third thing that was a little unusual. And that was that my mother was a 10th grade English teacher at that high school. And guess what I was doing? 10th grade English. So, like, there's my mom every damn day. You know, so I'd be walking down the hall, you know, and, you know, back then I just dressed to the nines. I wore like Jerry Garcia ties. I had like polo shirt, like all buttoned down, all like really proper, you know, nice, you know. And I'd be walking down the hall, and there my mom would be coming. I'm like, oh hell, and she'd go, Gregory, your tie's on, you know. I'm like, oh damn it. She goes, just straighten your tie, Gregory. You know, I'm like, so you know, she'd like go up and get, you know, like kiss my head, and I'm like, damn it. And then I would do the same thing to her. I'm like, she'd like be walking on. I'm like, Mom, and she'd be like, what, Gregory? I'm like, Mom, you didn't cut the crust off my sandwich. Like, and she's like, you don't need your crust cut off your sandwich. I'm like, Mom, it tastes better when you cut it. You know, so I just spit all over Vale. Take that with you. Save it for later. So, you know, I'm like, but I don't want to. You know, so we're in the hall. We're talking about food. So it was a little awkward. Little, you know, not much breathing space, but it started to get into a routine. Very stressful, but got into a routine. And, you know, by the time, I'm like just a few years older than these students. I mean, I'm 22, 23, you know, and, you know, I'm teaching seniors and sophomores. So the seniors are just a few years younger than me. And, you know, so it's like you try to have authority, you don't. Like, you know, and you do whatever anybody tells you to do. Students don't listen to you, you know, you're just like, I'm like, please guys, like, come on, just do it, come on, God, you know, that's pretty much how it was for me. So, I told you about the kid that crawled out the open window. I mean, that little bastard, Garrett. Yeah, I hated Garrett. That's the only kid I've ever hated that I've taught. Miserable kid. Just escaped into the wilderness and didn't see him again that day. And he was a weird one. But anyway, but I slowly started getting into a routine. And like I said, the one thing that you notice is that, you know, you're living amongst your students. Like, you know, on our street, it was halfway between State College and the mall. For those of you who know State College, my parents lived right downtown now. We moved about 5 years ago. You know, I got 7 or 8 students on my street. You know, that's fine. Like, I get along with everybody, no problem. And things started to go pretty well. Like, I'm getting the hang of it. I have to like fight for every minute I get in front of the classroom so I can get experience, and you know. But the one thing is, it's tiring. It's really tiring. And so I would come home just exhausted, and then I'd have to grade, and I'd have to plan lessons, and then I'd have, you know. And at the same time, my mom was working, and my dad hadn't retired at that point, and he was always exhausted. My dad basically invented the world campus at Penn State. Where you can take classes online. When he came back to Penn State to work, there were like, I think 15 students enrolled in this thing, and when he left, there were 28,000. And, you know, so he was just the coordinator of this enormous, he was a vice president, this enormous virtual campus. When he retired, 3 people had to be hired to replace him. That's how hard he worked. You know, I mean, the guy, he's brilliant, much smarter than me. And he was just a powerhouse, but, you know, he would come home and he'd be exhausted. He'd be out by 10, you know, he'd be asleep. And, you know, my mom was always grading, and then she'd go to sleep. And I was always a night owl. I was the one who always stayed up. And the thing that sucks about it is I'm like this now. I'm up till 1, you know, or 12 or whatever. And even though I do that, I still have to get up at 5:30 in the morning. You know, but I still stay up late. It's just, I can't change, you know. So, you know, I'm definitely not a morning person. But I would always be up later than my parents. Well, one night in October of 2001, it was around 11:30 at night. So my mother's asleep, my dad's asleep, I'm up. And I'm in the basement, and I hear the doorbell ring. I'm thinking, no one knows where I live. I mean, all my friends, you know, they know my apartment downtown. You know, they don't know, like, they've never been to my parents' house. Why would they get into a car and come out here, and why wouldn't they call? Who the hell's at the door? You know, so I go up there. You know, my parents are, like, stirring up there, and they're like, my dad's like, "Meh," you know. And I'm like, it's okay, Dad, I got this. So I go out there, and I open the door, I'm like, what the hell? And I hear this car peel off down the street. And I look down, and I just see this, like, tail lights, you know, just, you know. And I look down, and there is a dinosaur figure, a cupcake, with a candle lit in it, a pack of Camel Light cigarettes, and a little sign that said, "We see you, Miller," on it. And I'm like, well, presents. So I like dinosaurs, so I took the dinosaur and I put it on my shelf, little Tyrannosaurus, and I ate the cupcake, and then I smoked all the cigarettes, and that was it. I didn't care. I'm a guy. I didn't know. And I hadn't quit smoking then, so I smoked all the cigarettes, and I'm like, well, thank you, kind gift fairies, you know, that's great. Like, you know, and my parents who was it? And I was like, oh, it's just some students of mine that figured out where I live and left me presents, because that's awesome. So, you know, they're like, no, all right, you know. So, weird, okay, a little odd, but didn't think much of it, really. Like, this is not, like, terribly beyond the realm of, you know, comprehension. So, okay. Then it happened again, all right? So, a week later, 12:30 in the morning, right? So, like, middle of the night, you know. It's a Friday night. Same thing. And I see, I run upstairs, you know, and I see this car, and I know, I saw it pretty clearly at this point. It was a 1986 white Dodge. Just an absolute piece of trash vehicle. Like, you know, like, it's one of those things, like, it's like the epitome of, like, a 90s kid's first car. Like, you know, that they get for $500, you know, and then it breaks down 6 months later, and that's it. And, you know, it just takes off down the street. And I look out, and there is a Triceratops, a Twinkie with a candle in it that's lit. And then a little note that says, we see you, Miller. Okay, and I'm like, okay, once was all right, twice is a little much, you know. Just because it's like, I have no control over it. Like, and my parents are getting woken up. My dad, once he's up, he can't go back to sleep. It's like, he's always been like that. So he's always exhausted when he can't, you know, when he gets woken up unexpectedly. So, at this point, I was like, all right, that's a little weird. Keep an eye on this. I added the Triceratops to my collection, you know. I got 2 of them. Over the next couple of months, it happened 7 more times.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And it started to get, like, weirder and weirder and weirder. One time there was an apple with a candle lit in it, but just all these, and all the notes were like, we're watching you, we see what you're doing, like all this stuff, and I'm like, okay, once or twice, nah, I don't care. 7, not so much, like not so good. So I said to my parents, I said, look, I know every cop in this town, and I did, because, not for the reasons you might think, but because I was this employee at this video store that dealt with, like, the entire town. And anytime some moron stole something, I'd have to tackle the moron, and then I would have to go to court. And so, like, and what was funny is I didn't have to. Like, I really actually didn't have to. Like, you weren't really supposed to, but I just thought it was kind of like, all right, I want to get this guy, and, you know, and so I'd always just, like, throw myself on whoever did it and make sure they didn't leave the store. One time it was a big frat guy, and he stole a copy of Animal House in order to get into a frat, like a fraternity. It was like he was a pledge. He was huge. And I literally threw myself onto the back of him, and he just walked out the door with me on his back. Like, he didn't hit me, he didn't try to throw me off. He literally just carried me down the street, and I'm like this, and then eventually he's like, all right. And then he just dropped the tape and walked away. Like, I'm like, okay. You know, so I would do this. But anyway, anytime someone stole something or anytime there was an unpaid thing or, you know, they'd have whoever was on shift that day go to court. And it was right at the courthouse in Bellefonte where the whole Sandusky trial happened. That's where I always had to go to court for these non-paying people. But as a result, the nice thing was I got to know almost every police officer in town, like all the detectives, all the cops. Most of them were pretty cool. And I said to my mom, I said, I can make a few phone calls and we could do something. And my mom's like, no, absolutely not. And I'm like, why? Well, I'll tell you why, guys. My mother, her worst nightmare is public humiliation. Like, she just can't stomach the thought. I live with public humiliation every day of my life, all right? I probably have a hole in my pants right now, and I don't even care. So, that's just life for me. I just stopped caring years ago. My mom, it's like a complex with her, and her worst nightmare with public humiliation would be to make it into the Center Daily Times police log, okay? Now, that's the local paper. And the police log is where they have all the weird things that people get arrested for or complain about that are like public record over the preceding week with the police. So, this stuff becomes public. And my favorite, there'd be these funny write-ups. This woman at Penn State, she was some weird professor, and what you're going to learn is that universities attract eccentric people to work for them. Like, a lot of the people that work there, you can't imagine them ever getting gainful employment anywhere else, And this woman was one of them. She was a music professor. And she walked around, and I'm not kidding, with 2 parrots on her shoulders all the time. They were alive, like real live parrots. And that is weird enough, but then they would crap down her back. And so she'd be walking around with, excuse the term, bird shit all over herself. And you'd see her out there like this. Oh yeah, well, if you look at Wagner's, and she's going on about stuff, and there's just 2 big blue and red parrots on her shoulder, and they're crapping down her back. Well, one time, someone just ran up and grabbed one of the parrots and ran away. And so apparently they just took it. Imagine, just like they just took off and they ran off down the street. And she was racing after them, like flailing about, and that made the police law. Okay, my favorite one, which I kept in my wallet as a clipping until it fell apart, was from like 1997, and I love this. This guy gets home from work. And he's unlocking his door, and he just hears screams from his neighbor's house. And it's this guy, and it's just, oh! He's like, oh my God. And he's like, Floyd's getting murdered. And so he frantically, I'm just making that up, I don't know what his name is. But beyond that, this is but he did think that, because that was in there. So he calls the cops, and he's like, oh my God, oh my God, and he's like, I don't know what to do, what do I do, and so he's, and finally the police show up, and this guy's still screaming, and they're like, they're knocking at the door, nothing, they're slamming on the door, nothing, they break down the door, this guy's still yelling, and they go upstairs, and they're following the screams, and there's just like pants on the floor, shoes on the floor, like a shirt. It turns out this guy was constipated and was just having a real hell of a time with it. Like, it was just an epic battle between him and his bowels. Like, the poop was winning, ladies and gentlemen. It was a rough time. So imagine that. Imagine you're trying to poop, and the police just, boom, kicking the door, what, and so that's what happened. Here's the thing, though, and this is my favorite part. That made the police log, and they didn't put his name, but they did put his address. So everybody for years would drive by his house and honk his horn and go, boom, like that, and then just keep running, just keep driving. So my mom was terrified of getting, like, something happening, that would embarrass her in front of her students, and because as a teacher, you're not exactly like a public figure, but you know a lot of people, and you're kind of entrenched in the community, people know you, and and so she didn't want that. She didn't want to like have that happen. So I said, Mom, we gotta call the cops about these people that keep coming to her door, and she's like, absolutely not. Yeah. And I'm like, damn it, Mom, all right, fine. So autumn gave way to winter. Winter turned into spring. Baby animals emerged from, and the flowers, reaching their heads towards the sun, started to blossom. All right, and that's when things took a dark turn with this whole issue. All right, so. Oh, you buried yourself, you little fat piece of crap. All right, so it happened again. And at this point, I had a shoebox full of stuff, like, that they had left on the porch. And I'm just getting, like, I hate feeling helpless. Like, I just wanted to, what?
Are they all dinosaurs?
Yes. No, but there's other things, too, like little books and trinkets and weird little, like a pair of, like, wind-up, like, chattery teeth. Like, what the hell? Yeah. It does, except it was a little not as cool as Boo Radley. Yeah. There was nothing like, oh, we have a special relationship. It wasn't anything like that. It was just like, damn it, like, what these people are creepy, and yeah. And so it happened. So we get to April, and doorbell rings late at night. I don't know what time it is, like midnight, like usually like a little before after midnight, and I answered the door, and at this point, we're all just resigned. We're like, oh, for God's sakes. Well, if there's a candle, we better blow it out. That's the only reason we even went to the door. And there is a candle in a little holder, and a book. And it's a Jack Kerouac book. Jack Kerouac is, the Beat Generation author who wrote On the Road. This guy's like counterculture genius, tragic hero kind of guy, died young like Fitzgerald, And I've read him, I took a course on him. I know a lot about him. And so I figured, oh, well, someone heard me talk about Jack Kerouac, and here's a copy of one of his books. And it was called Visions of Gerard, and it was about his little brother who died of pneumonia when he was very young, he was like 10. And it's only like a little 100-page book, right? It's the shortest book. So I took it, I'm like, oh, well, at least they have good taste. And I opened it up, and I started flipping through it. Every single page had a note in it. Over 100 of them, all right?
Really?
And I'm like, and here's the other thing, and this is what really got me. For the first time, they didn't just say Miller. They said Mrs. Miller, which meant all this time, I had been assuming that this was directed toward me, and it turns out it was directed toward my mom. Now, you don't mess with a guy's mom, all right? So I was like, oh, crap, all right. So that's creepy. And it's all like, we're watching you, what are you doing? It was never anything like profane, like vulgar. It was just creepy. It was just like, what the hell is wrong with you? So, so I was like, okay, well, I'm putting an end to this. So what I did was, at the time, my parents' house, I need a pen. Where's a pen? At the time, my parents' house was built on a hill. And so, I'm sure some of you have houses like this. So you have this hill, and it's built here, and it's kind of like, so you go in the ground level and it's the front, but the ground level in the back is in the basement. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's how our house was. So I could actually go out the back door, in my little nest in the basement, and go out there. And I used to smoke on there. One time I lit the house on fire. They had to call the fire department. That's another story. Unfortunately, we're running out of time for the chorus. You're not going to hear that one. But it's a loss. It's a loss to all of us. But so what I did was there's a little cement area, and inside that door, by the edge of the basement, I put a pair of tennis shoes and a brick, and I just set them there. And I kept them there. I made sure they were there. Now, at this point, I had gotten my other job back because I was sick of being broke, okay? I needed to be able to go and do things to make money in order to have fun and do things with other people, like girlfriend, friends, going out. And, dinner and a movie at the soda shop, that sort of thing. At the malt shop, and an ice cream cone afterward, that sort of thing. So, we all did this. Like, one of the interns was a bartender at Toftree's Country Club. She could clear $500 in tips in 2 nights. And there's her rent, and so she was hurting, so we all went and got our jobs back. Like, we all just needed the money, and we just didn't tell anybody. And one time, the coordinator of the whole thing, of the whole program, showed up where I was at work at the video store at night, and we just kind of winked at each other, and he let it go. He was an odd, hippie-ish type of guy. He went off to Amsterdam for months every year and came back happy. So that happened. He's still there. He's still there. He's the one that got me into the program. He's the one that I told you about at the beginning who, saved me a ton of money and time and credits and all that stuff. And so I was working every day of the week. I was teaching and then planning, and then I'd go and work about another 30 hours a week at this other job. I was tired. So in May, just a few weeks after this latest incident, when I realized that it was my mother, not me, who was sort of being singled out by these people, I was closing up. It was the closing shift, and that means we're open till midnight. So by the time I had counted the money and coordinated everything and got everybody out the door, it was like 12:30. And we were still awake, so I took some friends back with me to the house, and we're in the basement watching a movie, some movie. And everything's good, everything's winding down, and the doorbell rings. And I'm like, excuse me. So I went over, I ran over to the place where I had my tennis shoes, and I jumped into them, and then I picked up and I grabbed the brick, and I just ran out the door. And I can imagine, they're like, what the hell is he doing? So I'm trucking around the side of the house toward the front yard, right? And at that moment, I see that car at the bottom of the driveway. And I see this dude just trucking it across the lawn. And from the car, this guy's going, go, 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 he's coming, go. And I'm like, you're goddamn right, I'm coming. And so he throws himself into the car, shuts the door, and I'm just like, oh, and they start to pull off. I take the brick. Don't ever do this. And I just took it and I slammed it off his trunk as hard as I could. Broke the brick, just dented the crap out of his car. And he roared off down the street, and I'm there in the street like, oh, like that. And so I went inside feeling like I'd accomplished something. Because I thought to myself, I have just done 2 things. I've shown them I'm insane, and I now have marked their car. So if I ever see it around, I'll know it's them. And I can wait by the car and give them the finger or something. I don't know. So there's that. So I thought, okay. So I came back in the house. All my friends are looking at me. I'm like, I'll be back. Now, this is a little personal information, and then you can do with it what you want. I still do this, too. Whenever I, triumph over adversity, whenever I have, a really good victory, something good happens, and I'm kind of the man. What I do is I go into a darkened room, and I listen to Eye of the Tiger, and I shadow box until the end of the song. It's just a thing I do. It's every year, at least once, I end up doing this. I did it a couple of months ago. It's just, it's late at night, and I'm just like, yeah, you know what? I am number one. I am the tiger, and look at that. I'll be like that. And that's what I did. I went and I shadow boxed in a darkened room, and then I just went back downstairs, and I'm like, let's keep going with the movie. So the next morning, my mom is like, was there some kind of a ruckus last night? She used the word ruckus. Who does that? So I'm like, yeah. I said, I scared off our friends. And she goes, how'd you do that? I'm like, don't worry about it. It's okay. And I'm like, and then later on that morning, I went and like took the pieces of broken brick and hid them. They're probably still there. And I thought, they will never bother us again because they think I'm insane, And of course I wasn't. Well, no, I wasn't. And May gave way to June. I finished college, graduated. I quit my job, and I started applying places, and I got the job here. I had to interview twice, and I got hired here in July, and 3 weeks later I was living here, and 4 weeks after that I was working here. It's August, and it's late August, and the first day is underway, and everything's great, and, I'm off into my new life, So, hey, buddy. So at this point, the first year as a teacher is incredibly difficult because you're literally one step ahead of your students. You have the basic stuff for a curriculum if you're lucky, but I remember, and we didn't have laptops. We had to come in desktops, and they weren't compatible with the ones at home. So my first semester, I was here at 4:30 in the morning every damn day, writing up quizzes. I would write them out in pencil, and then I would come and I would type them up, and then I'd have to hope to God that the printer was working and that the photocopiers were working. Half the time they didn't, And I'm literally like imagine doing chapter 7 of Gatsby, and the day that it's due for you, I had just written the quiz 6 hours before. That's how fly by night the whole process is, because you're making it up as you go, and then you've got a curriculum, and you just build off of it, But that's what a first-year teacher does. You can plan things out, but it's just impossible when you have grading to do to write all of it at once. You just can't, So it was stressful, and I didn't go home a lot. State College is about 2.5 hours from here, 2 hours, 2.5 hours. And I would talk to my parents a lot, though, and I would call, and once in a while I would say, hey, did our buddies ever come back? And nope, think you scared them off. And I'm like, damn right, that's right. So I felt pretty good about that. I thought, well, that's taken care of, By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, I was ready. I needed a break. That 5-day off little window. It's like a tease, but, it's a tease for winter break. But I needed it. And so I was just ready. So I come home, and I'm like, oh, thank God. And what we did was my goal at Thanksgiving is to gain as much weight as possible without passing out. And sometimes passing out's fine. So, if I don't gain 4 pounds by the end of that weekend, I consider Thanksgiving a failure, And so I just basically glutted myself. I ate everything. We had the stuffing and the turkey and the cranberry sauce and the green beans and the corn and the peas and 3 different pies and, all the little, weird little things that you have, and corn on the cob and muffins and we ate all that, and then I went back a couple hours later and did it all again. And it was great. I'm like, oh yeah, I earned this. Yeah, this is awesome. Some grandmother's there, aunts, uncles, everybody's there. And the next morning, Friday, I went downstairs. Now, you need to know, I'm terrible when it comes to packing for a trip. I've traveled a lot, and I've never gotten the hang of it. So I'll pack 7 shirts, 1 pair of pants, no underwear, 2 socks, and a hat. That'll be it. And maybe a toothbrush without any toothpaste. That'll be what happens. So I am consistently ill-prepared when I travel. I'm never ready, And this was no exception, okay? What up, Chica? So what I did is I fished around in my closet until I found a blue bathrobe that I had in 7th grade. I had grown, and it had shrunk, and so it looked like a miniskirt. It's up to here. and I have a pair of raccoon slippers. They're like bunny slippers, but they're raccoons. And they're like looking up at me, and I just kind of like, and I'm not a morning person. So, I woke up like, oh God, I guess I should get up. So I plod downstairs wearing this ensemble of clothing. I just look like an absolute nightmare, And I mean, talk about a blackmail photo. Holy crap. And so I think I still have the raccoon slippers. So I wander down there. Now I'm like, ugh. Now my dad is a morning person. He's already at the counter. He's like, hi. I'm like, he's like, do you want some? So he's always sitting there. He's got his paper out. He's like, he's got the paper and he's got his little coffee and he's all just, he's puttering around the kitchen making stuff. And I'm like, oh God. And he's like, do you want some coffee? Now, my dad is a great man. I love my dad. He makes the worst coffee of any person who's ever lived. It's like diarrhea. And, I mean, literally it's just brown water. That's what it looks like. It's like, why, how? One time, I mean, I put up with it for years. I was polite about it. Until one time, when I was feeling particularly close to him, I sat down for dinner with my dad and I said, Dad, I hope this doesn't change our relationship. I love you, but I have a big question to ask you and I need an honest answer. He's like, anything, son. What would you know? What would you like to know? And I said, how is your coffee so shitty? I said, it defies logic, reason, physics. I said, your coffee makes me feel like less of a person after drinking it. And I said, I can't pretend it doesn't anymore. I said, I've tried! So help me, Dad, I've tried! And I said, and he goes, I don't know. I'm like, no, you don't know. How can you not know, Dad? How can you not know? And he's like, well, I do only put in 1/8 of the amount of coffee that they recommend. And I'm like, do you think, Dad, that may have had something to do with it? Do you think? Dad, we only live once. We're only on this God-given earth once. Put the full amount of coffee in the pot. Live a little, Dad. So he put 1/4 of the amount instead of the 8. So that's what I'm living with now. It's still that bad. It's still just as bad as I said. It doesn't matter, So I went there and I'm just like, he gives me the crappy coffee. I've given up. He's almost 70. I've given up. So I'm sitting there. I'm like, ugh. And my dad's like, oh, I mean, this morning he didn't have the paper. He said, oh, I forgot the paper. I said, oh, I'll get it. So I get up, my little miniskirt bathrobe, raccoon slippers, and my crappy coffee, and I just plod out the front door and down the driveway that's on the hill to the mailbox. And of course, the paper box is right underneath there. And so I'm not looking around. I'm just like, and I just thrust my hand into this paper box, and there's the newspaper, and I pull it out, and I just put it under my arm, coffee and paper. But I notice that there's something else in there too. And I'm not thinking, I'm tired. I'm like, oh, hell's this? Oh, hell's that in the box? So I put my hand in there, and I just removed this enormous, colorful wad of papers. And I just stare at it, like not even comprehending for a minute. I'm like, what is this? What is this? And then I put my coffee cup on top of the mailbox, and I started to pull them apart. They were hand turkeys. Do you know what a hand turkey is?
Yeah.
Where you put your hand up here, and these are the feathers, and here's the little face, and the gobbler. There were 24 of them. All of them said, we are watching you, Mrs. Miller, and they were all hand done. And, what?
Why do you take this?
So-
Wait, 2 dozen what?
Two dozen hand turkeys. If you weren't talking, Alferi, you would have known that. So I'm like, damn it, they're back. Like, they're back. Now think about the time that would go into 2 dozen of those. Well, that's the question, isn't it? So I walk back to my car, and I'm holding these. I'm pissed off. I'm like, damn it, they're back. I didn't see them off. They're over the bridge. So, and then I happen to look to my right. Now, at that time, I had a 1994 turquoise, leather-seated, 2-door Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. I loved that damn car. I inherited it from an aunt who passed away, who apparently had really good taste in cars. And I loved it. And I like turquoise. I'm not wearing any today. You've seen my turquoise shirt. I like turquoise. The car...
Turquoise?
How do you say it?
Turquoise.
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 You learn something new every day. 38 years. What?
I love turquoise.
Yeah, okay. Well, there you go. Well, anyway, whatever the color is, I like it. So,
Sorry.
what I learned, though, is that, what I noticed is that the car was no longer turquoise.
Turquoise.
It wasn't that color anymore. And it took me a moment to realize, I'm looking at it, I'm like, the entire car, the windows, the doors, the hood, the trunk, the roof, the tires, hand turkeys.
No.
Dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of hand turkeys. Must have been 100 man-hours put into this. It must have taken forever. All of them cut out individually, all of them colored in different colors, all of them saying, "We're watching you, Mrs. Miller." And I just looked, and I'm like, "Mo," you know, and I went back into the house. Okay. Go away. Go. Later. I don't know. Go. So, God's sake. End of school. I don't know. I just attract people. I just show up. So, hand turkeys. I called my mother. My mom comes downstairs. She's all groggy. She's like, What, Greg? What, Greg? And I'm like, hand turkeys, Mom. Hand turkeys. I just have this big fistful of them. I slam them down on the table on Beyonce's head. And I'm like, we've got to call someone, Mom. We have got to. She's like, no, absolutely not. And I'm like, So, nothing was done. But I was pissed. Autumn gave way to winter. A light, refreshing snow began to fall. Animals burrowed into their holes and migrated south for the winter. And Christmas rolled around. I was ready. I needed it. So, drive home the 23rd, and I'm trying to think, what day was it? Yeah, it was the 23rd. Drive home the 23rd. Get there just at dusk. And there's nice candles in the windows and a wreath on the door, and the Christmas tree is all lit up, and there's Rudolph playing from my dad's old records, and there's good smells coming from the kitchen, and, you know, all you needed was some consumptive ant threading popcorn onto a garland. You'd be set. And A Christmas Story with Ralphie and Randy and the BB gun. It started its 24-hour marathon, and my dad and I are playing Trivial Pursuit and eating beef log and drinking wine. And Trivial Pursuit, my dad loves it. It's the 1980s edition. He knows all of them. I don't know any of them. I was a kid then. So he's beating the crap out of me with this game. But all is right with the world. It's nice and cozy. There's a fire in the fireplace. Everything's great, you know. And I'm just about to take another sip of Merlot and swear at my father for beating me in yet another game when the doorbell rings. And I'm like, my heart just sank. I was like, and I walk to the front door, and I hear the car driving off as I am approaching the door, and I get to the door, and I open it. And you know this is the fish store. You're probably wondering where the hell is the fish. The fish was staring up at me from the front step, wearing a pair of golf shoes with a cigarette in its mouth.
What?
Yes, they had taken a 12-inch brook trout.
Stop.
No, it was quite recently killed. There was still blood on it.
Ow.
They had shoved a cigarette in its mouth and then put a regular pair of shoes under it so it looked like it had big feet and was wearing a pair of shoes.
Did your mom smoke?
No.
Then why would they think? Okay.
None of this makes sense. None of it. I mean, they're not thinking. And there is a note that says, "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Miller." And that's when I just lost it. So there's this fish staring up at me with its dead little eyes. And I said, "We are calling the cops. We are going to get to the bottom of this. I've had enough." You know, and she goes, "What, Gregory? What? What?" And she comes to the door. She's like, "Oh." And my dad comes up and he's like, "Oh, God." You know? And I'm like, "There is a fish wearing a pair of golf shoes and smoking a cigarette." And I said, "That cannot go. That cannot be." So, my mother won't have anything to do with it. She's pissed. She's like, "No, absolutely, no. I know it's annoying." My dad goes, "Karen, this is pretty creepy. I think we better call someone." So my mom goes, "Fine," and just walks out of the room. Goes upstairs. And I'm like, "All right, call the cops." So call them. All right. Half an hour later, all the students are gone. I mean, in Penn State, the only thing the cops do is take care of students that are drunk idiots. And I mean, that's literally all they do. They're not falling off a balcony. They're, getting hit by a car or something, or getting into a stupid fight. I can't tell you how many fights I broke up just working downtown. I had a drunk kid throw a Jack Daniels bottle through my roommate's bedroom window one time. And so I just got home from work, so across the house, we had an apartment downtown, I hear this crash. And my roommate stumbles, he was asleep, comes out all cut up, like from the glass, like right on his bed. So I went out, do not do this, I don't approve of this. This guy was just staggering around in the parking lot in the back, and I just knocked him out. And then I called the police, and they took him away. And that was that. I was so pissed off. One hit, glass jaw, down. And that's the only time I ever did that. What's that?
With a fist or with a bottle?
With a fist. We're just knocked right in the jaw. Ow! Oh, I was furious. I mean, my friend had to go to the hospital. Like, my roommate, Greg Nagurney. He's now an environmental lawyer in Maine. So you just see everything. So the police had nothing to do during the off season. No problem. So they sent someone out. And it was a police officer I didn't know. Full marked squad car in the driveway. He comes up. He sits down, and my dad, my parents invite him in. My dad's like, "Would you like some coffee?" I'm like, you don't want the coffee. So he sits down, and we start showing him the stuff. And what?
Sorry, she said my phone was about to my phone.
Oh, okay. Well, that's great. Thank God for that. All right. So we sit down at the kitchen table, and we start showing him the stuff. And you know how, like, when you go to a doctor, you don't want the doctor to ever go, oh boy. Like, you don't want that. You didn't want that then either, but that's exactly what the guy did. He goes, oh God. And I'm like, what? He goes, this is pretty creepy. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not what I want to hear. He goes, I said, well, what do we do? He goes, well, honestly, I don't know how to catch these people. He goes, most of the time we don't. I said, well, we've been doing this for a year. He goes, I know. He goes, short of you setting up your own surveillance, you just have to be in the right spot at the right time. Then he goes to leave. And when he goes up, keep in mind, his marked squad car was in a driveway. He opens the door, and he just stops. And he goes, wasn't that fish wearing a pair of shoes? I'm like, oh, yeah. He goes, it ain't now. While he was in our house, they had come back, taken the shoes, and left the fish. This pissed the cop off. He took this personally. And he just looks at it and goes, he turns bright red. I could see it on the back of his neck. And he's like, so son of a bitch. Son of a bitch. I said, I have a plan. He goes, you want to come back in? He goes, yeah. Yeah, I do. And he's like, I'm like, all right, come on back in. So he comes back in and sits down. He sat down. So we got him. We see the hell we're making a plan. I said, so and I wish there was a photograph of it. So I can just see my dad like this, my mom like this, the cop like this, and I'm like this, and it's just a still life. Like that's what it would have been, a moment in time, right? And I said, look, I have my car in the driveway. I said, they want to see a reaction. They're going to play this up. They're close. And the fact that you were here means they're going to come back again as soon as you leave, because that would be the best thing they could do to really stick it home, to really annoy us. I said, how would you feel about this? I hide in my car. When they come back in, or when they come back around, I will know it's them. He goes, how will you know it's them? I said, there's a brick dent in the back of their trunk. And he goes, how do you know that? I said, don't worry about it. I will gun it, roar off after them, blast my horn. You'll be circling the neighborhood. You'll hear the horn, and you'll follow me, and you'll come and get them. How's that sound? And he thought about it, and he's like, all right. I'm like, yes! All right, we're doing this! We're doing it! Yes! All right, so.
Was your phone in that?
I hope not. I don't know. We'll worry about it later. All right, so at this point, so my mother, of course, just goes, you are going to wear mittens and a hat. And I'm like, Mom. I said, no, Mom. And she goes, mittens. And I'm like, all right, fine, I'll wear mittens. So I get this tousled cap, you know, and this bright red pair of mittens. It's hard to look hardcore in mittens, like, you know what I mean? And I go out there, you know, and I get into my car. And what I did is I just reclined it. I just put it, and I just got backwards. I'm just staring, like, real creepily into the night, waiting, right? Waiting.
I'm so bored.
And, no, it took like 5 minutes, and this car comes by, real slow, with its headlights off. And I'm like, oh, my God. So I jumped around, and I gunned it, and I tore off, and I went off down the street. And, okay, and it was the cop. I had caught the cop, and he was like, oh, pretty good. I was like, no, you're pretty good yourself. All right, okay, so back, you know, all right, okay. So, went back, got in the position, like, couldn't have been more than 3 minutes. I see my mom staring at me from the road, like, get away, stop, and get off. You know, those are my big red mittens. And here comes the car, the moonlight glinting off the brick dent in the trunk. I'm like, oh my God. So, again, you know, take off after, you know. And they were driving a 1986 Dodge. I was driving a 1994 Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme. They didn't stand a chance. Never do this. But it was a T at the bottom of the street. It was like a nature preserve. I simply went around them. I mean, I was blasting the horn, and I just went around them, and I just simply lodged myself in the street. They couldn't go around. And here comes the cop. Sirens on, lights blaring. I'm like, ah, got you! You know, so I'm out of that car, slamming on their hood with my fist. You get out of that car! You get out of it! You get out! So he comes out and he's like, Mr. Miller, let's just settle down. Go sit down, like in your car. And are you sure it's them? Like, yeah! And he's like, okay, all right. And so I start to walk away. I did this. I start to walk away. I go, Mr. Miller. I'm like, sorry. You know, so meanwhile, he starts to carry, I can't see who's in there, but I'm just staring at them through the back window, like, you know. So after 5 or 10 minutes, he comes back, and he goes, Mr. Miller, he goes, I don't really know. I don't think it's them. I'm like, what are you talking about? The brick dent. And he goes, look, not to be sexist, but there's a girl in there with this guy. She's crying. usually girls don't do this kind of thing. Again, not to be sexist, but they don't. I really don't think it's them. And I said, it has to be them. I said, how old are they? He goes, they're like 19. I said, call my mom, see if she taught them. So he calls, and I can hear my mom through the phone. She's like, is everything okay? I'm like, you know, he's like, oh yeah, everything's fine. You know. Well, so anyway, they went on. She had taught them, and so he's like, oh really? Oh, you did? Okay, all right. I know everything's fine. We'll take care of it. He looks at me and just goes, give me 3 minutes. So he goes back to the car. I'm like, and he comes back smiling like a minute and a half later. He goes, yeah, they did it. And I'm like, what did you say to them? He goes, I told them that we were going to DNA test all the stuff, and that if they lied about not doing it, and they had done it, then they would have to pay for the tests, and that would be $50,000. And I'm like, is any of that true? He goes, no, none of it. I'm like, oh, that's great, okay. So he goes, so apparently he said there's a third person involved. He said the person they say was in charge was their friend who lived like 5 doors up from you. And he goes, go back to the house. And he goes, are your parents going to want to press charges? I said, yeah. So he's like, okay, just go back. So here's what happened. So I went back in. I'm feeling good. I'm feeling my parents and all this stuff. And he comes back and he goes, yep, they all admitted it. And he goes, I went to the house. They had my mom, all his students, and they liked her. That's what they said. They were in some arty-farty New York school, and they thought it would be like a postmodern, dumb thing to do. But the mom comes to the door, the mastermind behind this, kid that lived up the street. And so that's why he only did it at Thanksgiving and Christmas. He had gone off to college, and he was only home, just like I was, for the holidays. All right? So he says, apparently his mom came to the door, and the cop explained it, and she goes, I am so ashamed. Get this. She goes, he just got arrested for doing something similar to another family yesterday. So he was doing this to like multiple people. And so, and I said, what can we get this on? He goes, we can get him on vandalism, trespassing, intimidation, and harassment. And I go, what will the fines be for that? He goes, about $6,500 and a lot of community service. And my dad goes, hit him with everything. And I looked at the police officer and told him the Miller family said, have a Merry Christmas. Now, the story does not end there. There's more. Okay, we're almost there, but there's a little more. All right. I went up and listened to Eye of the Tiger in the dark. And then Christmas Eve was the next day. Christmas morning, drove up to my grandmother's house in Dayton, Pennsylvania, north of here. Had a good couple days. Came back the 26th, and wake up the next morning. It's like deja vu from Thanksgiving. I come down, I got my little miniskirt bathrobe on, totally ill-prepared. My dad's sitting there at the kitchen table. I'm like, And my dad's already gotten the paper, though. That's the one different thing. And he's sitting there, got it out, reading it, crappy coffee in his hand, and I'm drinking it too, and it sucks. And he just stops and he just goes, oh my God. Oh my God. I'm like, what? What, Dad? What? And he just slides it over to me. And he just goes, he points to the police log. Okay, remember the thing? Okay, we're not in it. No, it's not us. There's a little headline that says, area teen assaulted by fish presses charges. I said, what? And he goes, look at the name of the person who did it. And it's the kid up the street. Here's what happened, okay? But right before they came and left it on our doorstep with a pair of golf shoes and a cigarette in its mouth, they were planning this over at some girl's house. So it's him, a guy, this girl that was in the car with him, and this poor girl whose house it is. And I guess they were getting like pretty worked up and pretty excited, but somehow or another, this guy just took the trout and just slapped her in the face with it. And they got him for assault on that. And I know, and I thought, oh, that's so great. And I said, Dad, I said, we need to help with the investigation. I said, we have the assault weapon stinking up our garage right now. We had thrown the fish in the trash can out in the garage, you know. And I said, do you think they want it? And he goes, I don't know. And I'm like, should we call? And he's like, okay, yeah. So my dad goes over and he calls, and just listening to his end of the conversation was obvious. Like, so we were the family who, like, you know, he just goes on. He goes, and then we read the thing about the fish, and we had the fish. It was left here, and do you want to come and get it for evidence? And there's just this long pause. You can hear the guy, like, you know, and then you just hear him go, okay, we'll send someone out. So they sent out a squad car. Some poor guy with a little plastic bag. He had to go riffling through our trash to get this fish, but they used it against this guy. And that was the last I ever saw him, except for one time. About 5 months later, it was spring. All the baby birds were out, you know, the blossoms and fresh cut grass and dew. Little children running around, you know. I'm driving up the street visiting my parents, and there's that kid in his driveway. And I thought, no, Greg, be the bigger man. Don't do anything stupid. Well, this kid always was skateboarding, and he was terrible at it. He was always falling and hurting himself, and he was always flying off into the road. So I'm going slow, and I'm just eyeballing this kid. And at that moment, the skateboard got away from him and went out into the street. And I don't know how it happened, but I ran it the hell over with my car and destroyed the damn thing. And I also don't know how this happened, but at that moment, I then rolled down my window and just gave him the finger. And then I drove away. And that's the fish story. That's it. So there you go. All right? Is that all right? Does that live up to it? It all happened. It's all real. Don't do any of those things. I don't condone my youthful actions. I was only 24. So just remember that. I'm a different person now. All right? Yes.
Did the girl and the other guy that were in the car get in trouble?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Gumball. Yeah. It was great.
Yep. I was thinking maybe she gave him a back.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I know. No, it was nothing like that. But, funny little postscript. About 4 or 5 years later, after I started telling this story, some of my former students, I just driven, it was summer, and I'd just driven 365 miles to Bethany Beach in Delaware. And I had just gotten out of my car. So I had literally been driving since 5 a.m. It was noon. Get out of my car. I'm in the parking lot. Suddenly, there are 7 of my former students just standing there. Like, literally, I'm out of the car. The first people I see are people I know. All great students, like all really good people. You know, like I always like seeing former students. It's nice. You know, as long as they're not like leaving crap on my doorstep. And even if they did, it wouldn't be such a big deal as long as it's not creepy and it doesn't happen over and over again. But so they're there, and we're like, you know, they're off in senior week. And I'm like, oh God, you know, they're staying in Fenwick Island. They've got a house. I said, look, if you're getting trouble, call me. You know, I'm like, there's no adult like anywhere. You know, so you know that we say goodbye. We took a big group picture and everything. And I went off to eat. And later on, I'm tired. So like, you know, we get to our hotel. It's like a motel. It's nice. And I'm just laying there like in the air conditioning, sprawled on this bed, watching like Judge Judy or something. You know, like it's just terrible. You know, I'm just like, like I don't have to do anything. You know. And at that point, there's a knock on the door. And I'm like, what the hell? You know. So I go over and I open it, and there's a bunch of little dinosaurs lined up with a sign on them saying, "We see you, Miller." And I'm like, oh my God. And I look up, and there's all my students, and they left them all there for me. They're cracking up. And I thought it was great. And I said, how the hell did you find out what room I was in? He goes, the security here is horrible. We just asked, and we didn't even use your first name. We just said, "Where's Mr. Miller staying?" And they gave him your room number. And I thought that's great. So I still have all those dinosaurs on my shelf at home, on my little library shelf. So I thought that was great. So there you go, guys. We're done. Have a nice day. Happy day tomorrow. Everything is done except journals. Those will be done for tomorrow, and you'll get your final grades, okay?